The night everything changed. LeBron James had just walked off the court after another crushing playoff loss. The cameras were surrounding him. Reporters were asking the same question everyone in America wanted answered. Was this the end? Was this the final game of LeBron's legendary NBA career? But while the basketball world was focused on LeBron's future, another story was quietly exploding behind the scenes. A story so disturbing that even veteran NBA insiders were caught off guard. Because just minutes earlier, reports began spreading across social media that Memphis Grizzlies forward Brandon Clarke had been found dead inside a home in Los Angeles at only 29 years old. And suddenly, LeBron's post-game comments started sounding very different. Not because he directly mentioned Brandon Clarke, but because of what he hinted at: the pressure, the isolation, the hidden struggles NBA players deal with when nobody's watching, the dangerous lifestyle surrounding young athletes with money, fame, injuries, and too much silence. Fans immediately started connecting the dots. And honestly, it terrified people because Brandon Clarke wasn't supposed to become this kind of story. He wasn't known as a troublemaker. He wasn't constantly in headline. He wasn't one of those players everybody expected to spiral out of control. In fact, people around the league described him as one of the kindest souls in basketball, which somehow makes what happened even darker. According to reports, emergency responders arrived at a San Fernando Valley home after a 911 call late in the afternoon. By the time paramedics entered the house, Brandon Clarke was already gone. Then came the detail that changed everything. Investigators reportedly found narcotics and drug-related items at the scene, while authorities began looking into the possibility of an overdose. And within hours, an old clip of Brandon Clarke started circulating online like wildfire. In the clip, Clarke looked exhausted. Not physically, mentally. He admitted he felt like something bad was about to happen to him. Then he said the sentence that now has the entire NBA world uncomfortable. Outside world ain't safe. That line hit people like a truck because now fans weren't just mourning a player. They were wondering what Brandon Clarke was trying to tell everybody before it was too late. And that's where LeBron James enters this story in a way nobody expected. For years, LeBron has warned people about what happens to NBA players behind closed doors. The mental pressure, the identity crisis after injuries, the loneliness, the people waiting to take advantage of vulnerable athletes the second their careers start slipping away. Most fans ignored those conversations until now, because Brandon Clarke's story suddenly started looking less like an isolated tragedy and more like a warning sign the NBA failed to notice. A rising young star, a $52 million contract, a devastating injury, months away from basketball, legal trouble, isolation, fear, and then death at 29 years old. That doesn't feel random anymore. And the deeper people looked into Brandon Clarke's final months, the more disturbing the story became. Because what happened next would expose a side of professional basketball the league never wants fans to see. If you're watching right now, comment where you're watching from, because this story is hitting NBA fans all across the world tonight. And if you believe there's more happening behind the scenes in professional sports than fans realize, press 1-inch the comments right now. Make sure you subscribe, because the deeper this story goes, the darker it gets. The kid nobody believed in. Before the headlines, before the tragedy, and before NBA fans started asking what the league missed, Brandon Clarke was just an overlooked kid fighting to be seen. He was not a 5-star recruit. He was not the name scouts rushed to watch. Major programs passed on him. And even after leading Desert Vista High School to a championship appearance in Arizona, Brandon still had to take the long road. That road began at San Jose State, not Duke, not Kentucky, not a national powerhouse, San Jose State. At first, he came off the bench, chasing minutes, fighting for respect, and proving himself one possession at a time. But then people started noticing the motor, the bounce, the defense, the way he attacked every rebound like it was personal. By his sophomore year, Brandon had become an all-conference player. But he knew attention was not enough. If he wanted the NBA, he needed a bigger stage. So he transferred to Gonzaga, and that changed everything. At Gonzaga, Brandon exploded. He became a defensive force, a transition weapon, and one of the most efficient players in college basketball. Then, in the NCAA tournament against Baylor, he delivered the game that made NBA front offices stop ignoring him. 36 points, 8 rebounds, 5 blocks. The kid nobody believed in had finally forced the basketball world to look at him. But the painful truth is this: Brandon Clarke spent his whole life proving he belonged in basketball. And years later, when basketball started slipping away from him, nobody seemed to realize how dangerous that silence could become. Memphis had found its future. When the Memphis Grizzlies drafted Brandon Clarke in 2019, it felt like the beginning of something special. The franchise had already landed Ja Morant with the second overall pick. Now they were adding an explosive, high-energy forward who perfectly matched Ja's speed, athleticism, and chaos. Almost immediately, fans could feel it. Memphis wasn't rebuilding anymore. They were becoming dangerous. Brandon fit the city perfectly. He played with relentless energy, dove for loose balls, blocked shots, sprinted the floor, and finished above the rim with violence. Every arena in Memphis fed off his hustle. He wasn't the loudest player. He wasn't chasing celebrity attention. He just worked. And NBA fans loved him for it. During his rookie season, Clarke became one of the biggest surprises in the league. He finished on the NBA All-Rookie team alongside Ja Morant and quickly earned a reputation as one of the most efficient young forwards in basketball. Suddenly, the same player nobody wanted out of high school was becoming part of the NBA's next generation. Then came the Grizzlies' breakout years. The team became one of the most exciting young squads in the league. Ja Morant was turning into a superstar, Memphis was winning games, and Brandon Clarke became one of the emotional engines of the roster. Every winning team needs players willing to do the dirty work. That was Brandon. He rebounded everything, protected the rim, changed momentum with hustle plays, and brought energy every single night. During Memphis's deep playoff run in 2022, Clarke elevated his game even more. Big rebounds, clutch finishes, huge defensive possessions. The Grizzlies trusted him in the biggest moments. And then the franchise made their decision official. 4 years, $52 million. The message was clear. Brandon Clarke was part of Memphis's future. From overlooked prospect to millionaire NBA cornerstone, his story looked almost perfect. But sometimes the most dangerous moments in an athlete's life happen right after everything finally comes together. Because while the world saw success, something else was quietly beginning behind the scene. And one injury was about to change the entire trajectory of Brandon Clarke's life. The injury that changed everything. In March of 2023, during a game against the Denver Nuggets, Brandon Clarke tore his Achilles tendon. And for NBA players, those 4 words can change everything. Some players never fully recover from it. Some lose their explosiveness forever. Some never mentally recover at all. And for Brandon Clarke, whose entire game depended on speed, energy, and athleticism, it was devastating. One moment, he was helping Memphis chase a championship. The next moment, he was stuck watching basketball disappear from the sideline. What fans don't always understand is this. Injuries don't just damage a player's body. They attack identity. These athletes spend their entire lives building routines around basketball. Practice, travel, competition, crowds, purpose. Then, suddenly, all of it stopped. The arena lights shut off. The cameras move on. And the world keeps spinning without you. For months, Brandon Clarke lived inside rehab rooms and recovery sessions while the Grizzlies kept moving forward. Younger players emerged, rotations changed, conversations shifted, and slowly, the isolation started growing. He returned briefly, tried fighting his way back, played through more setbacks, but the injuries kept coming. Knee issues, calf problems, more recovery, more missed games. Over a 3-year stretch, Brandon Clarke missed most possible games for Memphis. A player who built his identity around effort and movement was suddenly spending more time injured than actually playing basketball. That kind of reality breaks people emotionally in ways fans rarely see. And this is where LeBron James' warnings suddenly become impossible to ignore. Because LeBron has spent years talking about what happens to athletes once they feel disconnected from the game. The loneliness, the pressure, the mental exhaustion, the fear that your career and your purpose might disappear at any moment. And as the injuries piled up, so did the darkness surrounding Brandon Clarke's life outside basketball. What happened next shocked even people close to the league, because Brandon Clarke's name was suddenly about to appear somewhere nobody ever expected. A police report, the pressure nobody talks about. By the time Brandon Clarke started disappearing from the Grizzlies' rotation, something else was quietly happening behind the scene. The pressure was building, and not just basketball pressure, life pressure. Because one of the biggest lies fans believe about professional athletes is that money automatically protects them from falling apart. It doesn't. In many cases, it makes the fall even more isolating. Brandon Clarke had already achieved everything he spent his entire life chasing. NBA contract, fame, millions of dollars, recognition, respect. But now injuries were slowly taking all of it away piece by piece. And that creates a terrifying mental battle for athletes. Because when your entire identity is built around basketball, who are you once basketball starts disappearing? That question destroys more players than people realize, especially in the NBA. The schedule is nonstop. The pressure is nonstop. The expectations never slow down. And once a player gets injured long term, the world moves on fast. Fans stop talking about you. Media stops covering you. Teams start planning for the future. You spend more time alone, more time thinking, more time outside the structure that once controlled your life. That's the part LeBron James has tried explaining for years. The NBA is built to celebrate stars when they're winning, but it struggles to protect players when they're mentally unraveling behind closed doors. LeBron has openly talked about mental fatigue, emotional burnout, and the dangers surrounding young athletes with money and fame. And looking back now, those warnings feel haunting. Because Brandon Clarke's situation was becoming more unstable by the month, his body was failing him. His future looked uncertain. And according to people close to the situation, he no longer looked like the same person emotionally. Then came the moment that completely changed the public perception of Brandon Clarke. A police chase, felony charges, and allegations that stunned the NBA world. The night everything started falling apart. In April of 2026, reports surfaced that Brandon Clarke had been arrested in Arkansas after an incident involving a high-speed police chase. The details shocked people. According to reports, Clarke allegedly accelerated to nearly 100 miles per hour while attempting to flee authorities before eventually being stopped. Investigators also claimed a large quantity of controlled substances was discovered inside the vehicle. Almost instantly, the NBA world exploded with questions. What happened to Brandon Clarke? How did one of the quietest, most respected players in Memphis end up in this situation? Because this didn't match the image fans had of him at all. This was the same guy teammates described as calm, humble, and positive. The same player coaches called one of the easiest people to root for. And that's exactly why the story felt so disturbing. People close to the league started quietly acknowledging something uncomfortable. Injuries may have damaged far more than Brandon Clarke's basketball career. At this point, Clarke had already spent years battling injuries, surgeries, rehab, and uncertainty about his future in the NBA. And now, suddenly, police reports, court dates, drug allegations. It felt like his entire life was unraveling in public. But here's the part that really shook fans. Just days before his scheduled court appearance, Brandon Clarke reportedly appeared in an interview where he admitted he felt like something bad was coming. Not long after that, he was gone. That changed the entire tone of the story overnight. Because now people weren't just discussing an arrest anymore. They were replaying every warning sign, every strange quote, every emotional clue, and many fans started asking the same terrifying question: did people around Brandon Clarke realize how serious things had become? That's where the story becomes bigger than one player. Because LeBron James has spent years trying to explain that professional athletes are often treated like machines instead of human beings. And Brandon Clarke suddenly looked like the perfect example of that reality. A player with money, talent, success. And somehow, none of it was enough to stop the spiral. Outside world ain't safe. After Brandon Clarke died, NBA fans started searching for answers everywhere. And then they found the clip. At first, it looked harmless, just another short interview. But after everything that happened, the video felt chilling. Brandon Clarke looked exhausted, not physically exhausted like an athlete after practice. This felt deeper than that. His energy was different. His eyes looked distant. Then came the line nobody could stop replaying. Outside world ain't safe. The moment those words hit social media, the entire conversation changed. Because suddenly, fans weren't just reacting to a tragic death anymore. They were wondering if Brandon Clarke had been quietly crying for help the whole time. In the clip, he also admitted he felt like something bad was about to happen to him. Looking back now, people hear that sentence completely different. Not as a random comment, but as fear. And honestly, that's what makes this story so painful. Brandon Clarke spent most of his NBA career being viewed as one of the league's genuinely good people. Coaches praised him, teammates trusted him, fans respected him, yet somewhere behind the scenes, things were clearly falling apart, and almost nobody noticed until it was already too late. That realization hit the basketball world hard, because fans are used to seeing athletes as superheroes, millionaires, celebrities, but Brandon Clarke's final months exposed something far more human. Fear, isolation, confusion, pressure, loss of identity. The same player who once helped Memphis make deep playoff runs was now speaking like someone struggling to hold himself together emotionally. And the most haunting part, he seemed to understand exactly how vulnerable he had become once basketball stopped protecting him. Outside world ain't safe. That sentence became bigger than Brandon Clarke overnight. It became a symbol of something many current and former athletes secretly understand. For some players, the NBA becomes more than a job. It becomes structure, protection, purpose, identity. And once that structure starts disappearing, real life can hit unbelievably hard. LeBron saw this coming after Brandon Clarke's death. Fans started going back and listening to LeBron James differently. Not as a superstar athlete, but almost like someone who had been warning the basketball world for years. The night the Lakers were eliminated from the playoffs, reporters surrounded LeBron asking about retirement and whether that game could have been the final chapter of his career. But hidden inside those answers was something much heavier. LeBron talked about exhaustion, pressure, needing time away, recalibrating mentally and emotionally. Because Brandon Clarke had just died, people suddenly heard a completely different message. For over 2 decades, LeBron has survived an NBA environment that destroys a lot of players mentally. He has seen careers collapse from injuries. He has watched athletes lose themselves once basketball stopped giving them structure, and unlike most stars, LeBron has never pretended the league is emotionally safe. He has openly discussed mental health, the emotional pressure of fame, the dangers of isolation. That's why so many fans started connecting his comments to Brandon Clarke almost immediately. Not because LeBron was directly talking about Brandon, but because Brandon's story looked exactly like the type of situation LeBron had been describing for years. A young athlete loses his rhythm, then loses his health, then loses his confidence, then slowly loses control of life outside basketball. And by the time people realize how serious things have become, the damage is already catastrophic. What makes this even more uncomfortable for the NBA is that Brandon Clarke was not some forgotten player struggling alone. He had teammates, coaches, resources, money, and still, somehow, he ended up isolated enough for this tragedy to happen. That reality terrified fans. Because if it could happen to Brandon Clarke, who else might be silently struggling right now? The entire NBA went silent. After the news of Brandon Clarke's death became official, something unusual happened across the NBA. The noise stopped, no debates, no hot takes, no basketball drama, just shock. Because the more people talked about Brandon Clarke, the more heartbreaking the story became. The Memphis Grizzlies released a statement describing him as an incredible teammate and an even better human being. Former teammates shared emotional tributes. Coaches spoke about his kindness. Friends described him as the first person who would show up whenever somebody needed help. And almost every tribute repeated the same words: gentle, kind, positive, supportive. That consistency made the situation feel even more devastating. This was not a player the league viewed as dangerous or destructive. By almost every account, Brandon Clarke was one of the most respected personalities inside the organization, which forced people to confront a terrifying reality. If someone like Brandon Clarke could quietly spiral behind the scenes, then fame and money clearly do not protect athletes the way fans assume they do. One moment from Brandon's final year started spreading heavily online after his death. Months before everything happened, he had visited an elementary school and donated thousands of dollars to support literacy programs for children. While privately dealing with injuries, uncertainty, and emotional pressure, Brandon Clarke was still showing up for other people. That detail crushed fans emotionally because it reminded everyone that you can be struggling internally while still smiling publicly. You can look fine from the outside while quietly falling apart behind closed doors. And maybe that's the scariest lesson from this entire tragedy. Not every breakdown looks obvious. Some happen silently. Slowly, over time, the warning. The NBA can't ignore. Brandon Clarke's death is no longer just about basketball. It's about what happens when a human being slowly loses the thing that gave his life, structure, identity, and purpose, while the rest of the world keeps moving like nothing changed. For years, fans saw Brandon Clarke as one of the NBA's success stories, an overlooked kid who fought his way into the league, a hard-working teammate, a playoff contributor, a player who earned respect the difficult way. And yet somehow, even with millions of dollars, NBA fame, and support around him, he still reached a point where life outside basketball appeared to become overwhelming. That reality should force every athlete, every team, every fan, and honestly, the entire sports world to pause for a moment. Because professional athletes are not machines. They are human beings living under pressure most people will never fully understand. The pressure to perform, the pressure to stay healthy, the pressure to justify contract, the pressure to never look weak emotionally. And once injuries begin taking away the game they love, many athletes are suddenly forced into emotional battles they were never prepared for. That's why LeBron James's words continue to resonate so deeply after this tragedy. Not because LeBron predicted Brandon Clarke's death, but because he understood how quickly isolation can grow, how dangerous identity loss can become, how vulnerable athletes are once basketball stops controlling their lives. And maybe that's the lesson the NBA can no longer afford to ignore. Because Brandon Clarke's story exposed something painful. A player can be loved by teammates, respected by coaches, supported by fans, financially successful, and still be struggling silently. That's why conversations about mental health, emotional support, injury recovery, and life outside sports matter far more than people realize. Sometimes the strongest looking people are carrying the heaviest pressure. And sometimes the warning signs only become obvious after tragedy happens. Brandon Clarke played only 7 NBA seasons, but his story may end up leaving behind a lesson far bigger than basketball itself. Check on people. Take mental health seriously. And never assume success automatically means someone is okay inside. Because millions of fans watched Brandon Clarke play basketball but almost nobody realized he might have been disappearing emotionally right in front of them. Rest in peace to Brandon Clarke, and prayers to everybody affected by this tragedy. If you made it all the way to the end, comment where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe professional athletes need stronger emotional and mental support systems behind the scenes, press 1-inch the comments right now. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, and share this story with another NBA fan, because these are conversations the sports world genuinely needs to have more often.